Welcome to Nightville, where every shadow hides a secret.
What exactly are we looking for, Captain? The question was asked by Company First Sergeant Jacobs as we marched through a forest deep in southern Germany. Looking up from the map that I was holding, I stared at Jacobs and I shook my head before looking back down at the map. Jacobs must have assumed it meant that I wasn't at liberty to tell him and simply walked away to do other duties. However, truth be told, I didn't know the answer either. The night before at the battalion command post, the old man had told me that I was to take my company and sweep the area for German forces. For the past few days, aerial reconnaissance noted large numbers of enemy trucks driving along uncharted roads in this sector, and so High Command wanted to find out where they were heading to. The forest had no major population centers or positions of known strategic importance, so it seemed strange to have so much activity there. Was there an operations base there, where the remnants of the German military could stockpile weapons and supplies for future resistance? Was there a POW camp or maybe one of those terrible prisoner camps being discovered all over Germany? Nobody really knew, and it was up to me and my company to find out. Moving through the forest, my company navigated through the trees and kept an eye out for any enemy activity. Despite the war nearing its end, we knew that we had to keep alert. There were still some die-hard units in place like this, so it was never good to let your guard down in case we encountered them. With reports of trucks rolling around this area, I felt that such units were most likely present. And luckily for us, most of the morning was uneventful. Our search through the area found nothing but trees and rock. After resting at noon in order to eat, we soon continued our search, moving along the same direction until the lead platoon encountered a trail. Following this trail, we soon saw two trucks halted in the middle of the path. Meanwhile, dead German soldiers could be seen in and around the vehicles. Cautiously approaching the trucks, the leading squad quickly made sure that it was clear before securing the surrounding area. I then ordered the company to hold while me, Jacobs, my XO, and the platoon commanders inspected the trucks and the deceased German soldiers surrounding it. Were they ambushed? Second Lieutenant Henry Arnold, commander of 3rd Platoon, asked as he stared at the trucks. To our surprise, the vehicles had various damage on their cabins and their truck beds. To me, it seemed as if somebody took an axe and started swinging heavy blows on the trucks. It must have been some powerful man who did it. However, as the metal in the cabins was heavily shredded. That seems like it. The question now is, who did it? My XO, First Lieutenant Daniel Jenkins, replied, as he inspected the dead men on and around the trucks. Like the vehicles, they seemed to have been attacked by an axe-wielding assailant, as they had limbs sliced off. It was an awful sight, and many of the men who were battle-hardened veterans of countless battles had to look away from the terrible carnage. There aren't any resistance groups here, Second Lieutenant Henry Merrill said. I nodded at this, and I remembered the briefing we had at battalion headquarters a few days before. The area that we were in was deep in Germany, and the people were either loyal or too afraid to resist. Perhaps they were on their way to surrender to us and were ambushed by the die-hard forces. I saw Sergeant Jacobs shake his head at this. Oh, I doubt it, sir. Based on the direction their trucks are pointing, they would have been heading away from our lines and not towards it. Then who could have done this and why? Jenkins asked, but nobody could answer. Instead, we stared at the gruesome sight, confused and worried. Reporting what we encountered to battalion headquarters, I told them that we were unable to find out who was responsible for the destruction of the 2 German trucks and the death of its occupants. A sweep around the area found no signs of those who attacked them. The only sign that a battle had occurred was from the bullet casings that the Germans fired and their dead bodies. Acknowledging the information, headquarters told us to be on high alert and to continue our search around the area. With that, I ordered the company to follow the trail and to keep their eyes open for any hostile activity. I didn't want any of my men to meet the same fate as the Germans on the trucks had. However, as we marched along the trail, the sight of the dead German soldiers and the unknown reasons behind their deaths continued to plague my mind. For some reason, I wanted to turn back to the safety of our lines, but with no good reason to do so, I knew that we had to continue. The sight of 2 truckloads of German soldiers found dead on a trail would not ease the old man's anger at me if I told him I chickened out and failed to meet my objective. And the next hour of the march was without excitement, as we went along the trail and encountered nothing but the noise of the forest. Eventually though, 3rd Platoon, which was at the head of the company, reported to have found a heavily fortified mine entrance. Wasting no time, I quickly moved forward and joined Arnold, as he and his platoon laid prone in a depression that was covered with thick underbrush. From there, I could see flat open ground which was covered with barbed wire, and it had a concrete bunker covering it. Next to the bunker was a gun emplacement for a German 88. Meanwhile, behind the bunker were 2 watchtowers that guarded the concrete entrance that led to a tunnel on the side of a mountain. "The trail leads all the way there, sir," Arnold said before frowning. "It seems to be heavily defended, but there's something that you should know, sir." Before he could continue, I suddenly saw what he was most likely trying to tell me about. Staring through my field glasses, I saw a body laying on the ground, unmoving and seemingly dead. Then I noticed other bodies, around a dozen of them all over the enemy position. It seemed that the garrison there had already been taken out. Looking away and turning towards Arnold, I stared at him with disbelief. Seeing my expression, he must have known that I already saw the dead German soldiers. "Have you seen any sign of activity in those positions?" I eventually asked. "None, sir," Arnold said. "Me and the platoon sergeant observed the bunker, the gun emplacement, and those watchtowers, but saw no Germans aside from that dead. It could be a trap, but I'm not sure. If it is, it's one gruesome way to draw us in." I nodded. The terrain in front of the bunker was a killing ground. If we crossed, we would be completely exposed. If this was indeed a trap, then the Germans could fire at us from hidden positions that we haven't seen yet. But was it really a trap? It seemed strange for the enemy to bait us using dead men. It just didn't seem right. Maybe it wasn't a trap after all. Maybe this was the work of the same assailants that ambushed the 2 trucks earlier. That thought concerned me a lot. If it was the work of that unknown party, why haven't they made contact with us yet? Did it mean that they were hostile to both the Germans and us? We didn't know the answer, but we had to find out. To do that, however, we had to secure the enemy position ahead of us, and with that, I prepared the company to advance. The first to go forward would be 3rd Platoon. I ordered them to move up the trail and head towards the enemy bunker. As they advanced, the rest of the company would cover them, watching both the enemy fortifications and the high ground behind it, just in case there were enemy positions there. If they encountered heavy enemy fire, they were to turn back and regroup. As it turned out, their advance was met with no resistance. Eventually, they had reached the German positions, cleared and secured it, before signaling to us that it was safe for the rest of the company to join them. Reaching the position, I immediately inspected the dead German soldiers, and I looked down with dread to see that they had similar injuries to those from the ambush trucks. Dried blood could be found everywhere, bullet cases littered the ground, and severed limbs were scattered all over the place. It was an all too familiar sight. There was no doubt in my mind that they too were attacked by the same unknown party. And the question now was, who were they, and where were they now? Radioing headquarters, I reported our position to them and told them what we found so far. In my conversation with the commander, I noticed that the old man seemed to be more interested in news of us finding a mine than the report that unknown parties had attacked and killed the German garrison that guarded its entrance. His excitement regarding the former was probably because of the treasures that German mines seemingly held. Over the past month, Allied units have been finding mines that German authorities used as storage areas. Sometimes they used them to stockpile weapons and supplies. Other times they used them to hide their spoils of war. The old man was excited to find out what we had stumbled upon. Because of that, he ordered me to inspect the mine, while he and another company from the battalion moved towards our location. He wanted the inside of the mine inspected and secured by the time that he had arrived. I would have preferred not to bring my men inside. We weren't sure who was still down that mine, and if we ended up in a fight, a battle in confined and dark areas would be a nightmare. But I had orders to follow, and I didn't want to be on the old man's bad side once he had arrived. All I could do now was hope that whoever killed the Germans out here were friendly to us, and had also eliminated any Germans inside of the mine. Leading 2nd and 3rd platoon into the mine, I left 1st platoon and the weapons platoon under the command of Jenkins outside. They were to guard the tunnel entrance in case any German forces suddenly arrived and trapped us inside. Going through the tunnel, we saw more bodies on the ground. Some of them had been stabbed and others had limbs cut off. As I observed the bodies all over the tunnel, I couldn't help but wonder if they died trying to head into the mine or trying to get out of it. Managing to reach the end of the tunnel without incident, we found a large elevator platform. Just like other parts of this place, its floor was covered with dried blood. After inspecting the elevator to make sure that it was safe, a squad with the 2nd platoon commander, 2nd Lieutenant Justin Trevor, was lowered down. After a few minutes, the platform rose back with one of his men, who said that it was safe to go down and that I would be amazed to see what they found. Curious, I inquired what they saw down there. "It's some kind of factory, sir." "What kind of factory?" I asked, as we rode the platforms down. "Rockets, Captain," he said, scratching his head. "Like the ones they've been throwing at London, except they're bigger. They remind me of the time we went to New York to board the ship across the Atlantic." The rockets were indeed bigger. The underground room itself was huge. It was like an aircraft hangar deep under a mountain. Somehow the Germans had managed to carve out a gigantic room this far beneath the ground. Upon my initial inspection, the distance between the floor and ceiling was probably around 200 feet. All around this gigantic area were various rockets of various sizes, with some lying down and some standing up. This was indeed a factory for German rockets. However, just like above, dead bodies and bullet cases also covered the place. But unlike above, the dead were not just soldiers. Instead, it was a combination of soldiers and civilians, with the latter most likely being the technicians and laborers who worked in this facility. The presence of death within the mine itself told me that the unknown assailants had gotten in here too. Whether they were still in here or not, I wasn't sure, but the sight of so many dead was concerning. With us still not knowing what their intentions were, I ordered the men to keep their eyes open and to be careful at every corner. For all we knew, they might not be targeting just the Germans. As we began to search the area, I couldn't help but inspect some of the rockets that were held there. There were rockets of various sizes, and I was amazed how the Germans were able to produce these large machines in such quantities. Clearly, their underground industry and infrastructure was far greater than what we thought. One of the smaller rockets in there was over 40 feet long and had a diameter of over 5 feet. Upon approaching one, I recognized them as the V2. It looked exactly just like the ones in the photographs the battalion S2 had showed us. The other rockets, though, I could not recognize, but they were definitely bigger than the V2s. As we moved around the hangar and checked each rocket, it seemed like some of them were supposed to fit on top of one another. Now, I was no expert when it came to rockets, but it was obvious that numerous big rockets stacked together could extend the range of the last rocket on the stack. This made me wonder if the Germans had been developing a weapon that could hit further into Britain. Maybe they were even developing one that could hit America. Staring at the size of the rockets and their engines, I didn't think it was outside the realm of possibility. Looking around even more, I noticed a couple of strange rockets that stuck out from the rest. The first one was a small rocket around 40 feet long. This rocket had a small pair of wings that ran along its length, while at the front there was a canopy. Clearly this one was meant to be piloted. The thought of somebody riding a vehicle as dangerous as a rocket astonished me, and I wondered what unlucky pilot got assigned such a frightening job. The second strange-looking rocket was one that had a strange shape, one that made it resemble a bell and stood on 4 pylons that acted as its legs. Standing at around 60 feet in height and having a diameter of around 20 feet, it was definitely one of the bigger rockets there. Inspecting it, I noticed that unlike the others, it had no engines on it. Instead, the bottom was flat and there seemed to be no place for any of the rocket engines to be placed on. Another strange thing about them was that they had these large ramps on their side that led to the interior. Glancing inside, I could see that there were seats and controls in there, just like a cockpit. Seeing that made me wonder if what I was looking at was a rocket, since I assumed that those areas were supposed to be where the fuel was and not a cockpit. I was tempted to go inside and look around more, but I decided against it. There could be booby traps that could destroy the equipment and harm it. So I decided to leave it alone and let the engineers figure it out when they get their hands on it. There were 2 of the bell-shaped rockets in the hangar, with one seeming to have some form of major damage, while the other had a few dents on its hull, but it was largely intact. This latter rocket seemed to have been undergoing maintenance, however, since many of its panels were removed, while its machinery were littered all around it. As I continued to explore the hangar, one of the soldiers from 3rd Platoon approached me and said that Lieutenant Arnold had requested my presence. Earlier, I had ordered 3rd Platoon to further explore the facility and search the other rooms there, while 2nd Platoon remained at the hangar, clearing it and doing the best they could to pile the German dead to one corner of the room. After looking around the vast facility, it seemed that Arnold and his platoon had found something important. Taking a stairwell at the side of the hangar, the 3rd Platoon man led me up a few flights of stairs until we had made it to a room. In the room, Arnold stood there waiting. The room that he was in was filled with cabinets and tables covered with folders and documents. Gesturing to one of the tables, I looked to where Arnold was pointing and was impressed by what I saw. Schematics from one of the rockets was there, laid out right in front of us. I quickly realized that he had stumbled upon the blueprints and technical papers regarding the rockets being built in this underground facility. Smiling, I gave Arnold a pat on the back, knowing his find would be helpful for the engineers who would be studying the rockets that we found here. Sure, having the finished product was nice, but with these documents, the engineers at home would not only learn how to use the rockets, but also learn how to reproduce them without having to tear apart and study the ones in the hangar below. Looking around the room and seeing what else we could find, I noticed a panel of windows off to one corner. Glancing out of it, I realized that it offered a complete view of the hangar area below. After watching 2nd Platoon move around and work, I then turned my attention away from the window and stared at some of the documents on a nearby table. I had some ability in speaking and reading the German language, thanks to a childhood friend of mine who was the son of a German immigrant, so I decided to pick up one of the papers and see what was written. Military encounters with out-of-Earth beings. This piqued my interest. Out-of-Earth beings, what do they mean by that? Wanting to learn more, I continued to read. August 1943. First encounter with Die Glock. August 1943. First encounter with Die Glocke. A patrolling Mi-109 from a fighter squadron based in France sighted a bell-shaped object flying near Paris. An attempt to intercept was made, but the object increased speed and altitude, preventing the Mi-109 from catching up. Said flying object was later classified as Die Glocke. This made me think for a second. The bell, Die Glocke in German. Did this mean the bell-looking rocket at the hangar? I believed that it did. In December 1943, second encounter with Die Glocke. A Glocke was flying south of Berlin, spotted by local anti-aircraft batteries. January 1944, third encounter. During the A9 manned rocket suborbital test flight test, the pilot of the rocket reported sighting a Glocke approach and trail him. This sighting reveals that Die Glocke is capable of outer space flight. Said spacecraft continued to trail the A9 until the latter re-entered the atmosphere. February 1944, fourth encounter with Die Glocke and the sighting of a mothership spacecraft. And during the second suborbital test flight, the test pilot reported seeing a disc-shaped spacecraft in the distance. From this object, which would later be labeled as a mothership, he sighted a Glocke exit before moving towards them. The Glocke would trail the A9 until the latter re-entered the atmosphere. March 1944, fifth encounter with Die Glocke and the destruction of an A9 manned rocket. And during the A9's first operational mission, which was to conduct a photo reconnaissance of Washington, D.C., the manned rocket was intercepted by a Glocke at an altitude of 390 kilometers above the Atlantic Ocean. The pilot reported seeing a bright flash of light emitting from Die Glocke before all contact and data from the A9 was lost. It was later determined that the loss of the rocket was due to an attack from Die Glocke through an unidentified weapon. After this incident, military high command has labeled these entities in orbit above the planet as hostiles. May 1944, the sixth encounter and the shoot-down of one by a Ju-88R-1. After detecting an unidentified object flying over Nuremberg by radar facilities in the area, one Ju-88R was dispatched to intercept the flying object. The Ju located the object flying low and engaged it. After successfully scoring hits, the object crashed in the middle of the field. Ground forces would later recover the object and discover the deceased remains of out-of-Earth beings inside. The object itself would be recovered, identified as a Glocke, and taken to an underground facility for study. July 1944, Operation Jaeger. After careful preparations, military forces conducted a strike against the orbiting mothership. This task was given to the 1st Outer Space Squadron. 6 A9 manned rockets, each armed with a single radio-guided missile, and each stacked atop their own A-10 and A-11 rockets, were launched to intercept the mothership spacecraft. Upon reaching orbit, the A9s conducted course corrections in order to approach the out-of-Earth spacecraft and get within missile range. And during the approach, a Bell exited the mothership and approached the A9s. Through the use of a heat weapon, it managed to destroy 2 of them, before being destroyed by 2 radio-guided missiles from 2 of the 4 remaining A9s. With 2 missiles left available, 2 A9s pressed the attack and got within range. They fired and successfully damaged the mothership. Reports from the pilots state the damage must have been substantial, as they saw 2 of the Bells vacate the spacecraft and enter the atmosphere. One of them that evacuated the mothership was found landing in southern Germany. An infantry battalion was garrisoned in the area and quickly surrounded the Bell. After a brief engagement, the battalion had managed to kill 2 out-of-Earth beings and knock unconscious 2 others. They, along with the Bell, which was lightly damaged from the fighting, were brought to an underground facility for observation and study. After reading this, I was left dumbfounded. Was all that I read true? It seemed too outrageous to be. Yet remembering the bell-shaped rockets in the hangar, I began to wonder if there was some truth to this document. But if this was indeed true, then where were these out-of-Earth beings that the Germans had claimed to have captured? Were they being held in this facility? This thought nearly made my heart skip a beat. If they were indeed being held here, then where were they contained? And then another thought came into my mind. Were they even still contained? Remembering the dead bodies and the gruesome ways that they were killed, I assumed that they could have been the work of these beings. I then realized that we could be trapped here with creatures far stronger than us. At that moment, I was lost. I didn't know if I should believe the document or throw it away as rubbish. I was in the middle of debating with myself about that topic when Arnold's platoon sergeant came racing up the stairs. "Sir," he said to Arnold before turning to me. "Captain." He then paused, catching his breath before continuing. "We found something you both need to check out." Shoving the document into my pocket, I nodded and ordered the sergeant to lead the way. Moving down and going through long dark halls, the sergeant brought us deeper and deeper into the facility. With each hall, the occasional dead German could be found. Eventually, we reached a hallway where 2 3rd Platoon soldiers stood at the entrance. Laying on the floor next to them were 2 dead German soldiers, whose arms were cut off from their torso. Ushering us in, the platoon sergeant waited for me and Arnold to enter before following us. Inside the room were 2 large metal doors, both of which were ajar. Behind each door was a large metal bed that had multiple chains attached to it. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was some kind of holding cell. Moving towards the closest cell, I noticed that the metal door was at least 5 inches thick. Yet despite its thickness, it was clearly heavily damaged. Dents on the metal could clearly be seen, as if somebody had been punching it. Not only that, but the door had a hole where the large mechanical lock should have been. Looking around, I found the heavy lock laying on the other side of the room, as if it had been pushed off. I frowned upon seeing that. Something from inside must have applied enough force to remove the lock. Whatever was in there, I knew that it couldn't have been human. No man could have had the strength to do that. With no signs of explosives being used, it was obvious that sheer natural strength had kicked the lock off the door. Turning my attention to the other cell, I noticed that its door also had dents. However, the lock on that one was intact, although unlocked. My assumption at the time was that whatever was contained in the first cell, it had gotten out and freed the one in the other cell. After seeing the damage on the metal doors and noting the chains on the bed, I quickly remembered what I had read earlier in the German document. This must be where the Germans kept the creatures they captured from the spacecraft. Realizing that there was indeed truth to what was written on that paper, a sense of urgency suddenly filled me. Lurking in this mine or possibly in the surrounding forest were creatures not from this planet. At that point, I knew that we were in danger. Turning away from the cells, I quickly stomped back towards the hallway, as Arnold followed close behind. I told him about the paper I read and the possibility that Germans were killed by the creatures that they kept in here. I then ordered him to gather his platoon and meet me by the elevator platform. I wasn't sure if he believed what I said, but he gave no questions. With that, he and his platoon sergeant, along with the 2 members of the platoon that were already there, went to find the rest of his men. Meanwhile, I took a different route and began to make my way back to the large hangar area. There was a threat in this mine and the whole sector. I knew that I had to get my men out of the facility in case one or both of the creatures was still in here. I also knew that I needed to contact the battalion commander and tell him about the possibility of a being from outer space lurking in the forest, waiting to ambush them like the 2 German trucks from before. As I made my way through the maze of hallways, the distinct sound of gunfire immediately halted me. It was a continuous burst, and I identified it as the sound of a Thompson submachine gun. One of my men was firing at something. Bracing my rifle, I made sure that it was loaded and ready to go, and then taking a step forward, I cautiously navigated the hallways, being careful with each corner and making sure that there was nothing there to ambush me. Eventually, I began to hear voices as I neared a turn towards another hallway. Recognizing the voice, I felt some relief knowing that it came from First Sergeant Jacobs. However, the relief quickly turned into panic as I realized what he was saying. "Come on," I heard him shout. "Move faster, it's gaining on us." Rushing forward and turning the corner, I looked on to see 3 of my men heading towards my direction. A terrified expression could be seen on their faces as they ran for their lives. Behind the 3 was Sergeant Jacobs, who held his ground and fired his submachine gun at something at the other end of the hallway. Since the lighting there was dark, it was hard to tell what exactly he was trying to hit. But as he turned around to fall back, a creature that I've never seen before soon emerged from the darkness. It was strange and it was terrifying. The creature was nothing what I had expected a being from space would have looked like. I had read a couple of science fiction comics before the war, and every single time they showed creatures from other planets, they always looked human. However, what we had encountered in the facility was far from human. At first glance, the creature looked similar to a spider, a very large spider that towered over an average man. But as it got closer, I noticed that although its silhouette was similar to a spider, its features were nothing like the small creatures here on Earth. Its body was nothing but a large black eye with a glowing red pupil. It was frightening and unblinking, and I watched as it stared at Jacobs with murderous intent. Protruding from that eye were 8 legs that moved in a fluid manner that was dissimilar to the way that I knew spiders walked. It was also fast, as I saw it get closer and closer to Jacobs. Soon it looked like it would be in range to jab one of its legs at the sergeant. Remembering how many of the dead here had limbs cut off from their bodies, I feared that these creatures may have had razor-sharp legs that could easily cut through flesh and bone. Deciding to cover Jacobs as he retreated, I raised my rifle and pointed it at the creature's eye. With it standing tall, I was able to aim it at it without the risk of hitting the 4 men heading my way. Firing a few rounds at it, I managed to hit the creature. However, despite landing hits on it, the eyes seemed unfazed. Instead, it took a quick glance towards me, before returning its attention back on Jacobs. The eye was clearly tougher than it looked. Unable to stop it or slow it down, I looked down with horror as it closed on Jacobs and extended a leg towards him. In a swift motion, the leg stabbed him in the back and exited out of his chest. The creature then lifted the screaming Jacobs and tossed him to the side, his body impacting the wall before falling on the floor. Then, without failing to stop, the creature continued to move and started heading towards my direction. Realizing that bullets wouldn't be able to stop it, I decided against wasting ammunition on it. There was no hope fighting it. The only way to survive it was to get away. Once the 3 other men had gotten past me, I turned around and joined them. We didn't know where we were going, but we didn't care. As long as we were heading away from the creature, then we would be safe. From behind, I could hear the sound of its sharp legs tapping on the concrete floor as it trained to gain up on us. Never before had I felt fear as the one I experienced at that moment. My mind flashed images of Jacobs getting stabbed by its legs, and I was afraid that I would meet the same fate. I don't know how long we ran, but eventually we reached an area where one hallway intersected another. Staring at that intersection, I saw the silhouettes of a couple of men. Calling out to them as we got closer, I soon recognized Arnold among them. "Fall back," I shouted at him. "Get away." He just stared at me with a stunned and confused expression. Clearly, he and his men hadn't encountered the creature yet. It didn't take long for him to see it though, as I could hear it close behind me. The change on Arnold's face was clear. as I saw him fix his gaze to what was behind me. Without wasting time, he pointed his rifle towards the creature and shouted orders to his men to open fire on it. I wanted to tell him to run away and not waste time shooting at it, but my words were drowned out by the sound of rifle and submachine gun fire that echoed in the hallway. I cursed in frustration at this, knowing that their bullets would do nothing to the creature. However, as we got closer to Arnold and his group, I noticed them cease fire. Turning my head, I looked on in disbelief to see the creature turning around and fleeing from us. Although it did not seem to be injured, the volume of fire Arnold's men had poured out must have been enough to dissuade it from pressing on its advance. I had to remember that although it was strong, it wasn't invincible. The Germans, after all, had managed to kill 2 of them. Conferring with Arnold once we were sure that the creature was nowhere near us anymore, he told me that he had around a squad of his men gathered with him. His other 2 squads were still spread out in other levels of the facility, so he had the platoon sergeant look around for them, while he led the rest to where he had heard gunshots erupting. Due to the complexity of the facility, Arnold and his group got lost and were in the middle of trying to figure out where they were when they ran into my group and the creature that trailed us. Once he was done telling his perspective, I then informed him that we had to get up and out of the mine as soon as we could. The need to inform the battalion commander of the situation was crucial. When he asked about his men that were still spread out in the facility, I regrettably told him that we could only hope that the platoon sergeant could find them and lead them out of here. There was not much that we could do in locating them, and if we stayed here, we would only become targets for the creature. Begrudgingly, he nodded his head. I didn't like the idea either, but our priority at that moment was to inform battalion headquarters of what we had encountered here. Working together, our group cautiously navigated the various hallways as we listened for any sign of the creature nearby. Somehow, after many fearful minutes of wrong turns and shooting at things that weren't there, we managed to reach the large hangar. By then, our group had increased to 20 men, as we gathered some scattered soldiers from 3rd Platoon. I had expected somebody from 2nd Platoon to meet us upon our arrival there, since they surely must have been alerted by the various gunfire. However, what I saw made my heart sink. The creature had gotten there already and it had torn 2nd Platoon apart. Their bodies were strewn all over the hangar, lifeless with some missing limbs. Like the German bodies that we had found all over the facility, they now shared the same fate. I wasn't sure how many of 2nd Platoon remained, but I knew that more than half of them were gone now. Since the various squads were spread out throughout the large room, the creature must have been able to take them out one by one. Unable to form a heavy wall of fire just like we had earlier, the members of the platoon were cut down and left helpless to stop it. This must have been what happened to the Germans in this facility. They were systematically targeted by this being from space. Wasting no time to grieve, I quickly led my remaining men towards the elevator. Keeping our eyes wide open, we constantly scanned the area as we moved, in case the creature was still lurking nearby. As we reached the base of the elevator frame, one of the men pulled the lever to call it down. At that moment, I couldn't help but wonder for a second. Last time I checked, the platform was already down when it carried the last squad of my group down here. So why was it back up? My question was quickly answered when I saw the open platform lower down with a creature standing on it. I wasn't sure if it was the same creature we encountered before or a second one that had been lurking outside the mine. Whichever it was, the fact that it was outside told me that it must have gone out to attack 1st Platoon and the Weapons Platoon, which were posted at the mine entrance. This only further demoralized me, as it meant that more of my men had been killed. Staring at the creature as it descended, I watched as it leapt out of the platform before it fully got down. Landing just behind us, the creature immediately stabbed one of its legs before we could even fire a shot. Its attack struck one shoulder and penetrated him right on the chest. As the creature pulled back its leg, the man fell to the ground before laying flat as blood pooled around him. Letting loose our weaponry against it, we fired everything that we got at it. But even with the heavy torrent that we had placed on it, the creature managed to swing one of its legs and cut off the arm of another soldier. Quickly, he was grabbed and supported by the man standing next to him, but this resulted in a slight reduction in our firepower. Our onslaught against the creature was further reduced when I heard the distinct sound of multiple legs crawling from another corner of the hangar. Looking in that direction, I saw another creature move and rush towards us. Both creatures were now present before us, and I was forced to divide our fire in order to deal with both of them. This meant that the intensity of our barrage was not intense as I would have liked, and I prayed that it would be enough to stave off the two and keep them at a distance. For a while it seemed to have worked, as the one closest to us backed off, while the one further from us had difficulty approaching. I didn't know how long we could hold this line. It was a tense moment, and I could feel my heart beat harder and harder as I watched the creatures try and advance only to fall back. Knowing that our bullets wouldn't be enough to kill these creatures, and having no intention to stay there forever, I gradually pulled back my men, and we slowly backed away towards the elevator platform. As we withdrew, me and Arnold made sure that we kept up a continuous rate of fire against the creatures. We knew that any slackening could open up a gap that would allow them to attack. Slowly but surely, we managed to get on the elevator and gradually rise up from the hangar. As we rose away from the creature, we continued to pour out hot masking fire against them, making sure that they wouldn't hop up onto the platform. Only when we were sure that they couldn't get us did we allow our bodies to relax and crash. Riding the elevator up, we eventually reached the top, where we were greeted by the sight of a heavily armed squad pointing all its weaponry at us. Scanning the faces, I noticed that Jenkins was among them. Moving forward, Jenkins met me halfway and said that he was relieved to see me. Apparently, while we were busy evading the creature in the facility, Jenkins and his group encountered one that emerged from the forest. Rushing towards their position, they fired at it with all they got, but it continued its advance. Upon reaching their position, it managed to kill 2 men from 1st Platoon before rushing towards the mine entrance. As they chased after it, they watched it operate the elevator and descend down to where we were at. After that, Jenkins informed the old man of what just happened, as he and the group kept careful watch of the elevator. They had assumed that the creature got to us and had massacred my group, so he was relieved to see us get back up. An hour after returning to the surface, the battalion commander arrived within another company. After briefing him of what occurred, he told me to gather my men and have them rest along the nearby tree line. The company that he brought with him will be taking over the duty of guarding the mine entrance. Asking him when they'll be sending a team to go down the mine and secure the facility below, he told me that he won't until further reinforcements arrive. When I told him that I still had men down there, he simply shook his head. "Oh, they're not worth the risk of losing more of my men." Dejected, I kept silent as I watched him walk away. A few hours later, the rest of the battalion arrived, along with a company of engineers that was loaned to us by division headquarters. Armed with flamethrowers, bazookas, and light machine guns, a company from the battalion, along with the engineers, moved into the mine and descended down to the facility. We waited anxiously for the courier that they would send up once the operation was finished. After an agonizing hour, the courier came and said that the creatures were dead. One was killed after being set alight by a flamethrower and finished off by gunfire. The other was killed by a combination of bazooka and light machine gun fire. The price for this result was heavy. Around 30 men were killed. Later on, a new company was sent down to the facility to search for the missing men from my 2nd and 3rd platoons. They were found, but all were dead. For the next few days, we remained in the area, keeping the facility secured. And then 5 days after we had first entered the mine, 3 companies of military police arrived, along with officers from the Office of Strategic Services. One by one, the officers from the OSS visited each company and told us all the exact same thing. The events that occurred in the facility did not officially happen. We were to keep quiet about it to never tell anyone. If asked what had happened to our units during the past few days, we were to say that we encountered a German resistance pocket in the area and engaged them in heavy fighting. With that, they ended their talk with a threat, saying that any men who spoke of what really happened here would be found and dealt with. We didn't need an explanation to know what he meant. We stayed there for another day before regimental headquarters sent trucks to pick us up. The MPs would be left in charge of guarding the facility, as the OSS officers took over all operations there. As we drove away from the mine, I gave one last glance at it before looking away. Quietly, I prayed that I would never see such horrors like that again. My grandfather left this account in an old notebook. I found the notebook in a box filled with his old things during his military service. After his death last year, I was hoping to make a little article about him online, in order to honor the man my family knew and loved. However, after reading this account, I'm left to wonder if what he wrote was real or not. At first, I found it hard to believe, but after going through his notebook, I found something interesting that made me realize that there must be some truth in what he said. Left between the pages of the notebook was an old piece of paper with German text on it. Translating some of it, it read, "Military encounters with out-of-Earth beings